Well, it's long been recommended that you read to the ill to heal them. And since this is I was going to give you a choice between the adult book or the children's book, and if you're not feeling well, I think the children's book is a little bit better. But I will read you the other one sometime where you can read it on your own. But tonight we're doing The Little Prince. It's a classic, right up there with Winnie the Pooh. Very popular book in France. So, Chapter 1. Once, when I was 6, I saw a magnificent picture in a book about the jungle called True Stories. It showed a boa constrictor swallowing a wild beast. Here is a copy of the picture. In the book, it said boa constrictors swallow their prey whole without chewing. Afterward, they are no longer able to move, and they sleep during the 6 months of their digestion. In those days, I thought a lot about jungle adventures, and eventually managed to make my first drawing, using a colored pencil. My drawing number 1 looked like this. I showed the grown-ups my masterpiece, and I asked them if the drawing scared them. They answered, Why be scared of a hat? Not a cat. Why be scared of a hat? My drawing was not a picture of a hat. It was a picture of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. Then I drew the inside of the boa constrictor so the grown-ups could understand. I always need explanations. My drawing number 2 looked like this. The grown-ups advised me to put away my drawings of boa constrictors outside or inside, and apply myself instead to geography, history, arithmetic, and grammar. That is why I abandoned, at the age of 6, a magnificent career as an artist. I had been discouraged by the failure of my drawing number 1 and of my drawing number 2. Grown-ups never understand anything by themselves, and it is exhausting for children to have to provide explanations over and over again. So then I had to choose another career, and I learned to pilot airplanes. I have flown almost everywhere in the world, and as a matter of fact, geography has been a big help to me. I could tell China from Arizona at the first glance, which is very useful if you get lost during the night. So I've had, in the course of my life, lots of encounters with lots of serious people. I've spent lots of time with grown-ups. I've seen them at close range, which hasn't much improved my opinion of them. Whenever I encountered a grown-up who seemed to me at all enlightened, I would experiment on him with my drawing number 1, which I've always kept. I wanted to see if he really understood anything. But he would always answer, "That's a hat." Then I wouldn't talk about boa constrictors, or jungles, or stars. I would put myself on his level and talk about bridge, and golf, and politics, and neckties. And my grown-up was glad to know such a reasonable person. Chapter 2. So I lived all alone, without anyone I could really talk to, until I had to make a crash landing in the Sahara Desert 6 years ago. Something in my plane's engine had broken, and since I had neither a mechanic nor passengers in the plane with me, I was preparing to undertake the very difficult repair job myself. For me, it was a matter of life or death. I had only enough drinking water for 8 days. The first night, then, I went to sleep on the sand 1,000 miles away from any inhabited country. I was more isolated than a man shipwrecked on a raft in the middle of the ocean. So you can imagine my surprise when I awakened at daybreak by a funny little voice saying, "Please, draw me a sheep." What? Draw me a sheep. I leaped up as if I had been struck by lightning. I rubbed my eyes hard. I stared, and I saw an extraordinary little fellow staring back at me very seriously. Here is the best portrait I managed to make of him later on, but of course my drawing is far less attractive than my model. This is not my fault. My career as a painter was discouraged at the age of 6 by grown-ups, and I had never learned to draw anything except boa constrictors outside and inside. So I stared wide-eyed at this apparition. Don't forget that I was 1,000 miles from any inhabited territory. Yet this little fellow seemed to be neither lost nor dying of exhaustion, hunger, or thirst, nor did he seem scared to death. There was nothing in his appearance that suggested a child lost in the middle of the desert 1,000 miles from any inhabited territory. When I finally managed to speak, I asked him, "But what are you doing here?" And then he repeated, very slowly and very seriously, "Please, draw me a sheep." In the face of an overpowering mystery, you don't dare disobey. Absurd as it seemed, 1,000 miles from all inhabited regions and in danger of death, I took a scrap of pen and paper out of my pocket. But then I remembered that I had mostly studied geography, history, arithmetic, and grammar, and I told the little fellow, rather crossly, that I didn't know how to draw. He replied, "It doesn't matter. Draw me a sheep." Since I had never drawn a sheep, I made him one. I bought this book for Stanley, so it's entirely brand new. I made him one of the only 2 drawings I knew how to make, with one of the boa constrictor from the outside, and I was astounded to hear the little fellow answer, "No, no, no, I don't want an elephant inside a boa constrictor. A boa constrictor is very dangerous, and an elephant would get in the way. Where I live, everything is very small. I need a sheep. Draw me a sheep." So then I made a drawing. He looked carefully and then said, "No, this one is already quite sick. Make another." I made another drawing. My friend gave me a kind, indulgent smile. "You can see for yourself. That's not a sheep. It's a ram. It has horns." The failed sheep drawings. Too sickly, a ram, too old. So I made my 3rd drawing, but it was rejected, like the others. "This one's too old. I want a sheep that will live for a very long time." So then, impatiently, since I was in a hurry to start work on my engine, I scribbled this drawing and added, "This is just the crate. The sheep you want is inside." But I was amazed to see my young critic's face light up and say, "That's just the kind I wanted." Do you think this sheep will need a lot of grass? Why? There's the sheep in the crate, the one that the little prince wanted. "Because where I live, everything is very small. There's sure to be enough. I've given you a very small sheep." He bent over the drawing. "Not so small as all that. Look, he's gone to sleep." And that's how I made the acquaintance of the little prince. Chapter 3. It took me a long time to understand where he came from. The little prince, who asked me so many questions, never seemed to hear the ones I asked him. It was things he said quite at random that, bit by bit, explained everything. For instance, when he first caught sight of my airplane — I won't draw my airplane, that would be much too complicated for me — he asked, "What's that thing over there?" "It's not a thing. It flies. It's an airplane. My airplane." And I was proud to tell him I could fly. Then he exclaimed, "What? You fell out of the sky?" "Yes," I said modestly. "Oh, that's funny." And then the little prince broke into a lovely peal of laughter, which annoyed me a good deal. I like my misfortunes to be taken seriously. Then he added, "So you fell from out of the sky too? What planet are you from?" That was when I had the first clue to the mystery of his presence, and I questioned him sharply. "Do you come from another planet?" But he made no answer. He shook his head a little, still staring at my airplane. "Of course, that couldn't have brought you from very far." And he fell into a reverie that lasted for a long time. A reverie was like pondering. He plunged into contemplation of his treasure. You can imagine how intrigued I was by this hint about other planets. I tried to learn more. "Where do you come from, little fellow? Where is this where I live of yours? Will you be taking my sheep?" After a thoughtful silence, he answered, "The good thing about the crate you've given me is that he can use it for our house after dark." "Of course, and if you're good, I'll give you a rope to tie him up during the day, and a stake to tie him to." This proposition seemed to shock the little prince. "Tie him up? What a funny idea! But if you don't tie him up, he'll wander off somewhere and get lost." My friend burst out laughing again. "Where could he go?" "Anywhere, straight ahead." Then the little prince remarked quite seriously, "Even if he did, everything's so small where I live." And he added, perhaps a little sadly, "Straight ahead, you can't go very far." Chapter 4. That was how I learned a second very important thing, which was that the planet he came from was hardly bigger than a house. It couldn't surprise me much. I knew very well that except for the huge planets like Earth, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, which had been given names, there are hundreds of others that are sometimes so small that it's very difficult to see them through a telescope. When an astronomer discovers one of them, he gives it a number instead of a name. For instance, he would call it Asteroid 325. I have serious reasons to believe that the planet the little prince came from is asteroid B612. This asteroid has been sighted only once by telescope in 1909 by a Turkish astronomer, who then made a formal demonstration of his discovery at the International Astronomical Congress, but no one believed him on the account of the way he was dressed. Grown-ups are like that. Fortunately for the reputation of asteroid B612, a Turkish dictator ordered his people, on pain of death, to wear European clothes. The astronomer repeated his demonstration in 1920, wearing a very elegant suit, and this time everyone believed him. This is the astronomer when he first discovered the asteroid. And that's him selling his soul to the man. If I've told you these details about asteroid B612, and if I've given you its number, it is on account of the grown-ups. Grown-ups like numbers. When you tell them about a new friend, they never ask questions about what really matters. They never ask, what does his voice sound like? What games does he like best? Does he collect butterflies? They ask, how old is he? How many brothers does he have? How much does he weigh? How much money does his father make? Only then do they think they know him. If you tell grown-ups, I saw a beautiful red brick house with geraniums at the windows and doves on the roof, they won't be able to imagine such a house. You have to tell them, I saw a house worth 100,000 francs. And then they exclaim, what a pretty house. This is the Little Prince on asteroid B612. So if you tell them, the proof of the Little Prince's existence is that he was delightful, that he laughed, and that he wanted a sheep. When someone wants a sheep, that proves he exists. They shrug their shoulders and treat you like a child, but if you tell them the planet he came from is asteroid B612, then they'll be convinced, and they won't bother you with their questions. That's the way they are. You must not hold it against them. Children should be very understanding of grown-ups. But of course, those of us who understand life couldn't care less about numbers. I should have liked to begin this story like a fairy tale. I should have liked to say, once upon a time there was a little prince who lived on a planet hardly bigger than he was, and who needed a friend. For those who understand life, That would sound much truer. The fact is, I don't want my book to be taken lightly. Telling these memories is so painful for me. It's already been 6 years since my friend went away. Hold on. You try and be useful, and you just do annoying things, all of you. Alright. Telling these memories is so painful for me. It's already been 6 years since my friend went away, taking his sheep with him. If I try to describe him here, it's so I won't forget him. It's sad to forget a friend. Not everyone has had a friend, and I might become like the grown-ups who are no longer interested in anything but numbers. Which is still another reason why I have a box of paints and some pencils. It's hard to go back to drawing at any age when you've never made any attempts since the one of a boa from the inside and the boa from the outside at the age of 6. I'll certainly try to make my portraits as true to life as possible, but I'm not entirely sure of succeeding. One drawing works and the next no longer bears the resemblance. And I'm a little off on his height too. In this one, the little prince is too tall, and here he's too short, and I'm uncertain about the color of his suit, so I grope in one direction and another best I can. In the end, I'm sure to get certain more important details all wrong. But here you'll have to forgive me. My friend never explained anything. Perhaps he thought I was like himself, but I, unfortunately, cannot see a sheep through the sides of a crate. I may be a little like the grown-ups. I must have grown old. Chapter 5. Every day I'd learn something about the little prince's planet, about his departure, about his journey. It would come quite gradually in the course of his remarks. This is how I learned, on the 3rd day, about the drama of baobabs. This time, too, I had the sheep to thank, for suddenly the little prince asked me a question, as if overcome by a grave doubt. Isn't it true that sheep eat bushes? Yes, that's right. Ah, I'm glad. I didn't understand why it was so important that sheep should eat bushes, but the little prince added, and therefore they eat baobabs, too. I pointed out to the little prince that baobabs are not even bushes, but trees as tall as churches, and that even if he took a whole herd of elephants back to his planet, that herd couldn't finish off a single baobab. The idea of the herd of elephants made the little prince laugh. We'd have to pile them on top of one another, he observed perceptively. Before they grow big, baobabs start out by being little. True enough, but why do you want your sheep to eat these little baobabs? He answered, oh, come on, as if we were talking about something quite obvious, and I was forced to make a great mental effort to understand this problem all by myself. And in fact, on the little prince's planet, there were, as on all planets, good plants and bad plants. The good plants come from good seeds, and the bad plants from bad seeds. But the seeds are invisible. They sleep in the secrecy of the ground until one of them decides to wake up. And then it stretches and begins to sprout, quite timidly at first, a charming, harmless little twig, reaching toward the sun. If it's a radish seed or a rosebush seed, you can let it sprout all it likes. But if it's the seed of a bad plant, you must pull the plant up right away, as soon as you recognize it. As it happens, there were terrible seeds on the little prince planets. Baobab seeds. Plant soil was infested with them. Now, if you attend to a baobab too late, you can never get rid of it again. It overgrows the whole planet. Its roots pierce right through. And if the planet is too small, and if there are too many baobabs, they make it burst into pieces. It's a question of discipline, the little prince told me later on. When you finish washing and dressing each morning, you must tend to your planet. You must be sure to pull up the baobabs regularly, as soon as you can, Tell them apart from the rose bushes, which they closely resemble when they're very young. It's very tedious work, but very easy. This is what elephants would look like if they were stacked on Little Prince's planet. And this is the Little Prince taking care of all the baobab seeds. One day he advised me to do my best to make a beautiful drawing for the edification of the children where I live. If they travel someday, he told me, it could be very useful to them. Sometimes there's no harm in postponing your work until later. With baobabs, it's always a catastrophe. I knew one planet that was inhabited by a lazy man. He neglected 3 bushes. So following Little Prince's instructions, I have drawn that planet. I don't much like assuming the tone of a moralist, but the dangers of baobabs is so little recognized, and the risks run by anyone who might get lost on an asteroid are so considerable that for once I am making an exception to my habitual reserve. I say, children, watch out for baobabs. It's to warn my friends of a danger which they, like myself, have long been unaware that I work so hard on this drawing. The lesson I'm teaching is worth the trouble. You may be asking, why are there no other drawings in this book as big as the drawing of the baobabs? There's a simple answer. I tried, but I couldn't manage it. When I drew the baobabs, I was inspired by a sense of urgency. This is the Little Prince with his big baobabs taking over his planet. Chapter 6. Oh, Little Prince, gradually this is how I came to understand your little life. For a long time, your only entertainment was the pleasure of sunsets. I learned this new detail on the morning of the 4th day when you told me, I really like sunsets. Let's go look at one now. But we have to wait. What for? For the sun to set. At first you seemed quite surprised, and then you laughed at yourself and you said to me, I think I'm still at home. Indeed, when it's noon in the United States, the sun, as everyone knows, is setting over France. If you could fly to France in 1 minute, you could watch the sunset. Unfortunately, France is much too far, but on a tiny planet, all you had to do was move your chair a few feet. And you would watch the twilight whenever you wanted to. One day I saw the sunset 44 times, and a little later you added, you know, when you're feeling very sad, sunsets are wonderful. On the day of the 44 times, were you feeling very sad? The Little Prince did not answer. This is the Little Prince on his planet. On the 5th, chapter 7. On the 5th day, thanks again to the sheep, another secret of the Little Prince's life was revealed to me, abruptly, with no preamble. He asked me, as if it were the fruit of a problem long pondered in silence, if a sheep eats bushes, does it eat flowers too? A sheep eats whatever it finds. Even flowers that have thorns? Yes, even flowers that have thorns. Then what good are thorns? I didn't know. At that moment I was very busy trying to unscrew a bolt that was jammed in my engine. I was quite worried, for my plane crash was beginning to seem extremely serious, and the lack of drinking water made me fear the worst. What good are the thorns? The little Prince never let go of a question once he had asked it. I was annoyed by my jammed bolt, and I answered without thinking. Thorns are no good for anything. They're just the flower's way of being mean. Oh. But after a silence, he lashed out at me with a sort of bitterness. I don't believe you. Flowers are weak. They're naive. They reassure themselves whatever way they can. They believe their thorns make them frightening. I made no answer. At that moment I was thinking, if this bolt stays jammed, I'll knock it off with the hammer. Again, the Little Prince disturbed my reflections. Then you think flowers? No, not at all. I don't think anything. I just said whatever came into my head. I'm busy here with something serious. He stared at me, astounded. Something serious? He saw me holding my hammer, my fingers black with grease, bending over an object he regarded as very ugly. You talk like the grown-ups. That made me a little ashamed. But he added, mercilessly, you confuse everything. You've got it all mixed up. He was really very annoyed. He tossed his golden curls in the wind. I know a planet inhabited by a red-faced gentleman. He's never smelled a flower. He's never looked at a star. He's never loved anyone. He's never done anything except add up numbers. And all day long he says over and over, just like you, I'm a serious man. He's not a man at all. He's a mushroom. He's a what? He's a mushroom. Little Prince was now quite pale with rage. For millions of years, flowers have been producing thorns. For millions of years, sheep have been eating them all the same. And it's not serious trying to understand why flowers go to such trouble to produce thorns that are good for nothing. It's not important, the war between the sheep and the flowers. It's no more serious and more important than the numbers that fat red gentleman is adding up. Suppose I happen to know a unique flower, one that exists nowhere in the world except on my planet. One that a little sheep can wipe out in a single bite in one morning. Just like that, without even realizing what he's doing. That isn't important. His face turned red now, and he went on. If someone loves a flower, of which just one example exists among the millions and millions of stars, that's enough to make him happy when he looks at the stars. He tells himself, my flower's up there somewhere. But if the sheep eats the flower, then for him it's as if suddenly all the stars went out. And that isn't important. He couldn't say another word. All of a sudden he burst out sobbing. Night had fallen. I dropped my tools. What did I care about my hammer? About my bolt? About thirst and death? There was, on one star, on one planet, on mine, the earth, a little prince to be consoled. I took him in my arms. I rocked him. I told him, the flower you love is not in danger. I'll draw you a muzzle for your sheep, and I'll draw you a fence for your flower. I didn't know what to say. How clumsy I felt. I didn't know how to reach him, where to find him. It's so mysterious, the land of tears. Let's see. You get a little more reading time. Chapter 8. I soon learned to know that flower better. On the Little Prince's planet, there had always been very simple flowers, decorated with a single row of petals, so that they took up no room at all and got in no one's way. They would appear one morning in the grass and would fade by nightfall, but this one had grown from a seed brought from who knows where, and the Little Prince had kept a close watch over a sprout that was not like any of the others. It may have been a new kind of baobab, but the sprout soon stopped growing and began to show signs of blossoming. The Little Prince, who had watched the development of an enormous bud, realized that some sort of miraculous apparition would emerge from it, but the flower continued her beauty preparations in the shelter of her green chamber, selecting her colors with the greatest care and dressing quite deliberately, adjusting her petals one by one. She had no desire to emerge all rumpled, like the poppies. She wished to appear only in the full radiance of her beauty. Oh yes, she was quite vain, and her mysterious adornment had lasted days and days, and then one morning, precisely at sunrise, she showed herself. And after having labored so painstakingly, she yawned and said, "Ah, I'm hardly awake. Forgive me. I'm still all untidy. But the little prince couldn't contain his admiration. How lovely you are, aren't I? The flower answered sweetly. And I was born at the same time as the sun. The little prince realized that she wasn't any too modest, but she was so dazzling. Believe it's breakfast time, she had soon added. Would you be so kind as to tend to me? And the little prince, utterly abashed, having gone to look for a water can, served the flower. She had soon begun tormenting him with her rather touchy vanity. One day, for instance, alluding to her 4 thorns, she remarked, Little prince, I'm ready for tigers with all their claws. There are no tigers on my planet, the little prince objected. Besides, tigers don't eat weeds. I'm not a weed, the flower sweetly replied. Forgive me. I'm not afraid at all of tigers, but I have a horror of drafts. You wouldn't happen to have a screen? A horror of drafts? That's not a good sign for a plant. The little prince had observed how complicated this flower is. After dark, you will put me under a glass. How cold it is where you live. Quite uncomfortable, where I come from. But she suddenly broke off. She had come here as a seed. She couldn't have known anything of other worlds. Humiliated at having let herself be caught on the verge of so naive a lie, she coughed 2 or 3 times in order to put the little prince in the wrong. That screen? I was going to look for one, but you were speaking to me. Then she made herself cough again, in order to inflict a twinge of remorse on him, all the same. So the little prince, despite all the goodwill of his love, had soon come to mistrust her. He had taken seriously certain inconsequential remarks, and had grown very unhappy. I should have listened to her, he confided to me one day. I already said I shouldn't have listened to her. Sorry, not I should have. I shouldn't have listened to her, he confided to me one day. You must never listen to flowers. You must look at them and smell them. Mine perfumed my planet, but I didn't know how to enjoy that. The business about the tiger claws, instead of annoying me, ought to have moved me. And he confided further. In those days, I didn't understand anything. I should have judged her according to her actions and not her words. She perfumed my planet and lit up my life. I should never have run away. I ought to have realized the tenderness underlying all her silly pretentiousness. Flowers were so contradictory, but I was too young to know how to love her. Chapter 9. It's in Roman numerals. In order to make his escape, I believe he took advantage of a migration of wild birds. On the morning of his departure, he put his planet in order. He carefully raked out his active volcanoes. Little Prince possessed 2 active volcanoes, which were very convenient for warming his breakfast. He also possessed 1 extinct volcano, but, as he said, you never know. So he raked out the extinct volcano too. If they are properly raked out, volcanoes burn gently and regularly without eruptions. Volcanic eruptions are like fires in a chimney. Of course, on Earth, we are much too small to rake out our volcanoes. That is why they cause us so much trouble. The little prince also uprooted, a little sadly, the last baobab shoots. He believed they would never be coming back. But all these familiar tasks seemed very sweet to him on this last morning. And when he watered the flower one last time and put her under glass, he felt like crying. Goodbye, he said to the flower. But she did not answer him. Goodbye, he repeated. The flower coughed, but not because she had a cold. That's him trying to take care of the flower. I guess that's him breaking up with the flower and also watering her. Oh, and this is him raking out his volcanoes and stuff. A lot of raking. Raking. I've been silly, she told him at last. I ask your forgiveness. Try to be happy. He was surprised that there were no reproaches. He stood there, quite bewildered, holding the glass bell in midair. He failed to understand this calm sweetness. Of course I love you, the flower told him. It was my fault you never knew. It doesn't matter, but you were just as silly as I was. Try to be happy. Put that glass thing down. I don't want it anymore. But the wind. My cold isn't that bad. The night air will do me good. I am a flower. But the animals. I need to put up with 2 or 3 caterpillars if I want to get to know the butterflies. Apparently they're very beautiful. Otherwise you will visit me. You'll be far away. As for the big animals, I'm not afraid of them. I have my own claws. And she naively showed her 4 thorns. Then she added, Don't hang around like this. It's irritating. You made your mind to leave. Now go. She didn't want him to see her crying. She was such a proud flower. 10. Chapter 10. He happened to be in the vicinity of asteroids 325, 326, 327, 328, 329, and 330. So he began visiting them to keep himself busy and to learn something. The first one was inhabited by a king, wearing purple ermine. He was sitting on a simple yet majestic throne. Ah, here's a subject, the king exclaimed when he caught sight of the little prince. And the little prince wondered, how can he know who I am if he's never seen me before? He didn't realize that for kings, all the world is extremely simplified. All men are subjects. Approach the throne so I can get a better look at you, said the king, very proud of being a king of someone at last. The little prince looked around for a place to sit down, but the planet was covered by the magnificent ermine cloak. So he remained standing, and since he was tired, he yawned. It's a violation of etiquette to yawn in a king's presence, the monarch told him. I forbid you to do so. I can't help it, answered the little prince, quite embarrassed. I've made a long journey and I haven't had any sleep. Then I command you to yawn, said the king. I haven't seen anyone yawn for years. For me, yawns are a curiosity. Come on, yawn again. It's an order. That intimidates me. I can't do it now, said the little prince, blushing deeply. Well, well, the king replied. Then I command you to yawn sometimes, and sometimes to... He was sputtering a little and seemed annoyed, for the king insisted that his authority be universally respected. He would tolerate no disobedience, being an absolute monarch, but since he was a kindly man, all his commands were reasonable. If I were to command, he would often say, if I were to command a general to turn into a seagull, and if the general did not obey, that would not be the general's fault, it would be mine. May I sit down, the little prince timidly inquired. I command you to sit down, the king replied, majestically gathering up a fold of his ermine robe. That is the king on his planet. The little prince was wondering. The planet was tiny. Over what could the king really reign? Sire, he ventured, excuse me for asking. I command you to ask, the king answered with great simplicity. Sire, over what do you reign? Over everything, the king answered with great simplicity. Over everything? With a discreet gesture, the king pointed to his planet, to the other planets, and to the stars. Over all that? The little prince asked. Over all that, answered the king. For not only was he an absolute monarch, but a universal monarch as well. And the stars obey you? Of course, the king replied. They obey immediately. I tolerate absolutely no insubordination. Such power amazed the little prince. If he had wielded it himself, he could have watched not 44, but 72, or even 100, or even 200 sunsets on the same day without ever having to move his chair. And since he was feeling rather sad on account of remembering his own little planet, which he had forsaken, he ventured to ask a favor of the king. I'd like to see a sunset. Do me a favor, your majesty. Command the sun to set. If I commanded a general to fly from one flower to the next like a butterfly, or to write a tragedy, or to turn into a seagull, if the general did not carry out my command, which of us would be in the wrong? The general or me? You would be, said the little prince quite firmly. Exactly. One must command from each what each can perform. The king went on. Authority is based, first of all, upon reason. If you command your subjects to jump into the ocean, there will be a revolution. I am entitled to command obedience because my orders are reasonable. Then my sunset, insisted the little prince, who never let go of a question once he had asked it. You shall have your sunset. I shall command it, but I shall wait, according to the science of my government, until conditions are favorable. And when will that be? Inquired the little prince. Well, replied the king. That will be around that'll be tonight, around 7:40, and you'll see how well I am obeyed. The little prince yawned. He was regretting his lost sunset. Besides, he was already growing a little bored. I have nothing further to do here, he told the king. I am going to be on my way. Do not leave, answered the king, who was so proud of having a subject. Do not leave, and I shall make you my minister. A minister of what? Of justice. But there's no one here to judge. You never know, the king told him. I have not yet explored the whole of my realm. I am very old, I have no room for a carriage, and it wearies me to walk. Oh, but I've already seen for myself, said the little prince, leaning forward to glance one more time at the other side of the planet. There's no one over there either. Then you shall pass judgment on yourself, the king answered. That is the hardest thing of all. It is much harder to judge yourself than to judge others. If you succeed in judging yourself, it is because you are truly a wise man. But I can judge myself anywhere, said the little prince. I don't need to live here. Well, the king said, I have good reason to believe that there is an old rat living somewhere on my planet. I hear him at night. You could judge that old rat. From time to time, you will condemn him to death. That way, his life will depend on your justice, but you'll pardon him each time for the economy's sake. There's only one rat. I don't like condemning anyone to death, the little prince said, and now I think I will be on my way. No, said the king. The little prince, having completed his preparations, had no desire to aggrieve the old monarch. If your majesty desires to be promptly obeyed, he should give me a reasonable command. He might command me, for instance, to leave before this minute is up. It seems to me that conditions are favorable. The king, having made no answer, the little prince hesitated at first, and then with a sigh, took his leave. I make you my ambassador, the king hastily shouted after him. He had a great air of authority. Grown-ups are so strange, the little prince said to himself as he went on his way. Chapter 11. The second planet was inhabited by a very vain man. Ah, a visit from an admirer, he exclaimed when he caught sight of the little prince, still at some distance. To vain men, other people are admirers. Hello, said the little prince. That's a funny hat you're wearing. It's for answering acclamations, the vain man replied. Unfortunately, no one ever comes this way. Is that so? Said the little prince. He did not understand what the vain man was talking about. Clap your hands, directed the vain man. The little prince clapped his hands, and the vain man tipped his hat in modest acknowledgement. This is more entertaining than the visit to the king, the little prince said. That's the vain man and his hat that he likes to tip when he's complimented. Little prince said to himself, and he continued clapping. The very vain man continued tipping his hat in acknowledgement. After 5 minutes of this exercise, the little prince tired of the game's monotony. And what would make the hat fall off? He asked. But the vain man did not hear him. Vain men never hear anything but praise. Do you really admire me a great deal? He asked the little prince. What does that mean, admire? To admire means to acknowledge that I am the handsomest, best dressed, the richest, and the most intelligent man on this planet. But you're the only man on this planet. Do me this favor, and admire me all the same. I admire you, said the little prince, with a little shrug of his shoulders. But what is there about my admiration that interests you so much? And the little prince went on his way. Grown-ups are certainly very strange, he said to himself as he continued his journey. Chapter 12. The next planet was inhabited by a drunkard. This visit was a very brief one, but it plunged the little prince into a deep depression. What are you doing there? Asked the drunkard, whom he found sunk in silence before a collection of empty bottles and a collection of full ones. Drinking, replied the drunkard, with a gloomy expression. Why are you drinking? The little prince asked. To forget, replied the drunkard. To forget what? Inquired the little prince, who was already feeling sorry for him. To forget that I am ashamed, confessed the drunkard, hanging his head. What are you ashamed of? Inquired the little prince, who wanted to help. Of drinking, concluded the drunkard, withdrawing into silence for good, and the little prince went on his way, puzzled. Planet with the drunkard on it. Grown-ups are certainly very, very strange, he said as he continued on his journey. Chapter 13. The fourth planet belonged to a businessman. This person was so busy that he didn't even raise his head when the little prince arrived. Hello, said the little prince, your cigarette's gone out. 3 and 2 make 5, 5 and 7, 12, 12 and 3, 15. Hello, 15 and 7, 22, 22 and 6, 28. No time to light it again. 26 and 5, 31. Whew, that amounts to 501,622,731. 500 million of what? You're still here? Oh, 501 million, I don't remember. I have so much work to do. I'm a serious man. I can't be bothered with trifles. 2 and 5 is 7. 501 million what? Repeated the little prince, who had never in his life let go of a question once he asked it. Businessman raised his head. For the 54 years I've inhabited this planet, I've been interrupted only 3 times. First time was 22 years ago when I was interrupted by a beetle that had fallen onto my desk from God knows where. It made a terrible noise and I made 4 mistakes in my calculations. The second time was 11 years ago when I was interrupted by a fit of rheumatism. I don't get enough exercise. I haven't time to take strolls. I'm a serious person. Third time is right now. Where was I? 501 million. Million what? The businessman realized that he had no hope of being left in peace. Oh, all those little things you sometimes see in the sky. Flies? No, the little tiny shiny things. Bees? No, those golden things that make lazy people daydream. Now, I'm a serious person. I have no time for daydreaming. Ah, you mean the stars? Yes, that's it, stars. And what do you do with 500 million stars? 501,622,731. I'm a serious person, and I'm accurate. And what do you do with those stars? What do I do with them? Yes. Nothing. I own them. You own the stars? Yes. But I've already seen a king who... Kings don't own. They reign over. It's quite different. And what good does owning the stars do you? It does me the good of being rich. And what good does it do you to be rich? It lets me buy other stars if somebody discovers them. The little prince said to himself, this man argues a little like my drunkard. Nevertheless, he asked more questions. How can someone own the stars? To whom do they belong? Retorted the businessman grumpily. I don't know. To nobody. Then they belong to me because I thought of it first. And that's all it takes? Of course. When you find a diamond that belongs to nobody in particular, then it's yours. You find an island that belongs to nobody in particular. It's yours. When you're the first person to have an idea, you patent it. And it's yours. Now I own the stars, since no one before me ever thought of owning them. That's true enough, the little prince said, and what do you do with them? I manage them. I count them, and then count them again, the businessman said. It's difficult work, but I'm a serious person. The little prince. Oh, well, lost the spot. The little prince was not satisfied. If I own a scarf, I can tie it around my neck and take it away, but if I own a flower, I can pick it. If I own a flower, I can pick it and take it away, but you can't pick the stars. No, but I can put them in the bank. What does that mean? That means that I write the number of stars on a piece of paper, and then I lock that piece of paper in a drawer. And that's all? That's enough? That's amusing, thought the little prince, and even poetic, but not very serious. The little prince had very different ideas about serious things from those of the grown-ups. I own a flower myself, he continued, which I water every day. I own 3 volcanoes, which I rake out every week. I even rake out the extinct ones. You never know. It's of some use to my volcanoes, and it's of useful to my flower that I own them. But you're not useful to the stars. The businessman opened his mouth, but found nothing to say in reply. The little prince went on his way. Grown-ups are certainly quite extraordinary, was all he said to himself as he continued on his journey. Yes, there were no more pictures. Okay. This is pretty much exactly halfway. So I am at chapter 14. We're ready to continue. Hopefully my calming voice puts you to sleep. It's about an hour of talking, so I'll talk to you later.